Hi, this is Catherine with Free Tours by Foot, and I'm here to guide you on a virtual tour through Greenwich Village. I'm going to try to be really clear about exactly where we are in the neighborhood so that you'll feel like you're right there with me. And some of the things I'm talking about, we're going to have links to them in the video notes, so if you want to find out a little bit more, you're going to be able to do that. So let's go ahead and get started.
Just so you know, the route that we're going to be using on this tour is very similar to the routes for both our self-guided tour and our audio tour as well. So we're going to include a map in the description if you want to follow along at home as we go. So we are going to start our tour this morning here at the beautiful Jefferson Market Library. Though it is a part of the New York Public Library system today, this building was actually constructed in 1875, originally as a courthouse. So I'm starting here this morning at the corner of 6th Avenue and 10th Street. Just a quick look to show you where I am exactly. Over here on this side of 6th Avenue because it's really the best view of this building at this time of day. It's pretty early in the morning, just so you know, so the light is really nice right now. We are going to be crossing to the other side of the street, actually behind the library. There's a beautiful little garden that I do want to make sure you see. So we're going to go ahead and start crossing now. The Jefferson Market part of the name that I referenced actually refers to an outdoor market that used to be here before the courthouse was constructed. And in the courthouse days, there was also a jail underneath the building. The courthouse was actually a pretty busy place when it was in operation. Several famous cases happened there. With the actual jail underneath, a famous name that spent a little bit of time there was Mae West. Mae West had written, directed, and starred in a play called Sex, and she was jailed here, and she was eventually charged with obscenity and corrupting the morals of our youth, and she was fined $500. So the building actually ended up becoming a library in the 20th century, and it was really a move to save the building by local preservationists because it was no longer being used as a courthouse and was in danger of being torn down. So the garden that I'm going to come show you is actually coming up here on the right. And don't worry, I'll get to a good spot where we can take a really, really nice look at it. But for any fans of the show Sex and the City, you may recognize this garden. This is actually the spot where the character Miranda ends up choosing to get married to Steve. So definitely a place to visit if you are a fan of Sex and the City. We actually have a Sex and the City sites tour if you are a big fan and you want to check out more than one site. So a good spot to just take a peek in here and enjoy a look at just a nice, quiet, green spot. It is a beautiful garden. The volunteers that maintain it do an absolutely amazing job. So what we are going to do now is we're going to turn away from this beautiful garden. We are going to be heading up here to the corner and taking a right. And we're going to start making our way over here to walk down Christopher Street. But what we're going to do as we walk is I'm going to give you just a very brief history of Greenwich Village, the neighborhood, in case it's not an area that you've been to or are familiar with it. This area was first inhabited by members of the Lenape tribe. That's the Native American tribe that populated Manhattan prior to the arrival of the Dutch West India Company in the 1620s. Later on, this was inhabited by Dutch and then English settlers who really used this as farmland. This was considered pretty far north of New York City at the time. It was a rural area. A little bit later on, you saw more and more people moving up here, really in the early 1800s, coming to escape what they thought were some of the ills of New York City. Lots of cholera and yellow fever going on at that time. This seemed like a safe alternative. So we're going to take a quick pause here. A pretty famous intersection here at Gay Street and Christopher Street. This is actually an intersection you'll see depicted on things like souvenir shops in the area. We're actually going to take a left here down Gay Street. We're going to walk down this way because it's got some great buildings. So this started to develop into this little village, Greenwich Village. In the early 20th century, you started to see a new wave of people moving here, what they called the Bohemians. So this was a new group of people. This was artists and activists and anarchists. And as you got further into the 20th century, this really became known as the place for artists in New York City. So you get a fun mix of buildings on this street, two different eras. Over here on this side, you've got the Federal style, the older style from the early 1800s. Other side of the street, you're going to get to see the Greek Revival style, which is more mid-1800s. 1800s. A lot of people think the name of the street has something to do with the neighborhood's connection to like the Stonewall riots. That's not it. It was someone's name that lived here. So we are going to turn down Waverly Place, and we're going to be walking down, and our destination is actually up ahead. You can kind of already see the point of it. It's a triangular shaped building called the Northern Dispensary. The Northern Dispensary was founded in 1827, and the idea was for it to be a free medical clinic, a place where the poor could come and receive free medical care. So now you're getting a better look at the triangular shape, the kind of unusual shape. This was the plot of land that was given, and this was the building that fit on this plot of land. So they actually treated a lot of people here at the Northern Dispensary over the years. One of them was Edgar Allan Poe, who lived in this neighborhood as a young man. I know northern seems like a strange description for like anything in this area, but of course at the time, 1827, this was considered pretty far north in New York City, and they existed for many, many years in some form or fashion, always maintaining that original vision of being a place where people who needed medical attention could come get it for free. So you can see actually written above the door here at the Northern Dispensary, the very bottom line, it's tiny, but it says heal the sick. That was meant to be the mission. And actually what eventually led to the closure of the Northern Dispensary in the 1980s. By then it was a dental clinic, and they refused to treat any patients who were afflicted with HIV or AIDS. This neighborhood had been very hard hit by the AIDS epidemic, and they refused to treat them, and they were seen as no longer upholding the intended mission of the place. So we're going to be crossing now over. We're going to go and check out the Stonewall Inn. So we're going to cross over here to this building that has all the scaffolding on it. This is the Stonewall Inn. This was actually built as stables during Greenwich Village's rural era, but in the 1960s, this was a gay bar. It was actually operated by the mafia. Like many gay-friendly institutions and establishments in New York City, the Stonewall Inn was subjected to frequent police raids. This is something that happened time and time again. But during one such police raid on June 28, 1969, the people here at the Stonewall fought back. And there was an uprising, and this led to rioting that lasted for several days. This was the beginnings of the modern-day LGBTQIA movement. All throughout the world, actually, on June 28th, people hold parades in commemoration of what happened here at Stonewall. So this area was actually made a national landmark, and this was the first national landmark that was dedicated specifically because of its place in the LGBTQIA rights movement. And over to the right, you can see what's called the Gay Liberation Monument, and that was dedicated in 1992. So a very small area, but very rich in history. We're going to be heading out of here to 7th Avenue. We're actually eventually going to be crossing over the street to right in front of where you see Village Cigar Shop. But I'm going to be heading over to this corner and giving you just a look up and down 7th Avenue. You're going to see some very quirky looking buildings in this area, and that's because 7th Avenue didn't actually extend all the way up here originally. They didn't do that until the early 20th century, and by that time there were actually quite a few buildings that were standing in the way that needed to be altered because of the incoming extension of 7th Avenue. So heading over here, one such building that was in the way of the 7th Avenue extension was an apartment building that was right here, and it was owned by a man named David Hess. While a lot of people were able to just chop off part of their building and carry on, David Hess, unfortunately, when it was all said and done, was only entitled to about 500 square inches of property. The city claimed everything else through eminent domain for 7th Avenue. David Hess's descendants actually refused to give up even this 500 square inches, put a mosaic here. It's actually considered the smallest piece of private property in the area. I love telling people this story. I tell them every guest on tours about this, and I think the reason I love it is it's just a great example of the spirit of this neighborhood. Every time I think about it, I'm like, you know what? Good for you, David Hess. So we're heading up here to this corner. We're going to be going around the corner so that we can check out Marie's Crisis Cafe. This is a piano bar specializing in Broadway show tunes. Very fun. So Marie's Crisis was named for a woman, Marie Dumont, who was a cafe owner during that bohemian era of Greenwich Village that I had mentioned earlier in the early 20th century. But you can see here a plaque to Thomas Paine here on this side. And it's saying he died on this site in 1809. It was not this building, it was a different house that was here on this site. But there is a plaque here to him on the side. You may or may not know who Thomas Paine is. I don't know how well known he is today, but he was very famous during the American Revolutionary War era for being the author of 2 pamphlets. The first was called Common Sense, and it outlined a very practical argument for why the colonies should break away from Great Britain. It's actually credited with kind of unifying people behind that idea. But the second one that he authored was a little bit later on during the Revolution, and the title of that second pamphlet was The American Crisis. So hence the crisis in the name Marie's Crisis. So we're coming up here to this corner, and we're actually going to turn around and we're going to head over to the other side of the street. And we're going to be heading down Grove Street for a little bit here. The building I'm actually about to show you is on the other side of the street, but it's a little bit easier to get a view from this side, and then we'll go ahead and go over to the other side and take a closer look. So this building across the street was originally built as the home of a merchant family, a relatively wealthy family, which you can probably tell because the house is pretty large. And it has several historically significant things about the house, but I would say one of the most significant is that this home was used as a station on the Underground Railroad. Sometimes people on tours, I find, are a little bit surprised to hear about Underground Railroad stations in New York City. New York was not a slaveholding state during the time of the American Civil War, but because of a law that was passed in 1850, a federal law called the Fugitive Slave Act, it made it so that if a formerly enslaved person was captured, even in a northern state, a free state like New York, who had abolished slavery in 1827, they could actually still legally be sent back to the South. So once that law was passed, all of a sudden it was no longer enough to make it just north of the Mason-Dixon line the way it had been previously. Now people were trying to get all the way to Canada. So once that happened, New York actually did become an integral part of the Underground Railroad, and we had stations all over, and this particular station actually had a tunnel that led underneath the street. We're going to take a quick pause up ahead just so you can see a little bit more of this street. I do think Greenwich Village is one of the most beautiful neighborhoods, and I think one of the things that makes it beautiful is its residential architecture. We do have a lot of these lovely townhouses and brownstones. A lot of these date back to the mid-1800s, and you can see these beautiful ornamental front entrances. You've got these great wrought iron handrails going up. A lot of them were initially built as single-family homes. Quite a few over the years ended up getting changed into apartments, flats, boarding houses, but a lot of them these days, Greenwich Village is a very pricey neighborhood now, a lot of them are, once again, single-family homes. In fact, we have one coming up here on the right, this wooden house. This one is for sale. I actually looked it up. It is, bargain price of $8.25 million, so what a deal. Anyway, we're going to cross over the street here, and we're going to go check out a tucked away little thing over here. So with a lot of these beautiful homes here in the neighborhood, you're going to see that the front entrances are like right up by the street. That was actually pretty common in the mid-1800s when a lot of them were being built. But then, for contrast, tucked away back here, as we get a little bit closer, you're going to see this little gate. And so this is the entrance to Grove Court. Grove Court was a collection of townhouses that were built back into this private courtyard. So we're going to get closer now, and I'm going to try to get in as much as possible so you can get a look at the houses. So I know today it seems like it would be super desirable to have a house in this like private little courtyard, but believe it or not, in the mid-1800s this was very much considered working class housing. Wealthy families actually wanted their house entrances like right up there by the street. It was kind of a way of showing off. So we're heading back up here to the corner here at Bedford and Grove. We're gonna be crossing over and taking another look at this nice wooden house, the one for sale. Wooden houses are actually kind of a rarity in New York City. We had a lot of fires in this place in the 1800s. They actually outlawed building it with wood. So across the street from the wooden house, you have a building that may look familiar to you if you are a fan of the TV show Friends. While Friends was largely not filmed in New York City, it was set in New York City, and the exterior of this building was used as the apartment building that the Friends lived in. So you'll see a lot of people here on this corner taking pictures of this building. So we are going to cross over. We're going to start making our way down Bedford Street. We have quite a few things on Bedford to see, but I am actually going to cut across to the other side of the street. I'm gonna wait and not get hit by this car, and I'm gonna go around and also try to avoid getting sprayed by this guy cleaning the sidewalk. Perfect. So the reason I wanted to do all that was I wanted to show you this building across the street on the right with the arched doorways. This actually used to be the site of a pottery factory. It's residential now, but you can still see the emblem of the company over the door. It's one of the things I love about Greenwich Village is a lot of the buildings have maintained some remnant of what they were before. We used to have a lot of factories and barns and silos. Coming up here on the left, we're going to pass a really nondescript green door. This was the entrance to Chumley's, which was a speakeasy during Prohibition when the sale of alcohol was prohibited. Also a very popular literary hangout. Unfortunately, it is now closed, but it held a unique spot in this neighborhood for a number of years. So this brick building across the street, I think looks, I don't know, maybe kind of boring compared to some of the other buildings that we've seen. Its history is not boring though. There's actually a crazy story involving this building, and it has the CIA and testing psychedelic drugs on unsuspecting people. It is nuts. This is another one. It's probably just too complicated for us to get into today, but please come and take our 2-hour neighborhood tour next time you're in New York. I promise you, you will not be disappointed when we are able to give you all of the sordid details. So we are coming up here to the corner. We're going to be going down Commerce Street. We're going to cross over and head down Commerce Street this way. We are going to go check out the Cherry Lane Theater. So the Cherry Lane Theater, which you can see now just across the street, was housed in a building that was actually a few different things before it was the Cherry Lane Theater. This building has been a box factory, it's been a tobacco warehouse, but it has been the Cherry Lane Theater since 1924. And some very well-known American playwrights have had their work done here at the Cherry Lane Theater. People like Eugene O'Neill and Sam Shepard, David Mamet. The Cherry Lane Theater is what's considered an off-Broadway theater. And that has nothing to do with the fact that we are currently really far from Times Square. All it means is that it's a theater that has between 100 and 499 seats, so smaller theaters. And we actually have several of them in Greenwich Village. Besides the Cherry Lane, you have the Minetta Lane Theater, you have the Barrow Street Theater, and all of them you will see absolutely amazing work if you go to a show there. You don't have to go to Broadway to see great theater. So the house on the corner is called the Isaacs Hendricks House. It is the oldest house in the neighborhood, built in 1799. The building to the left of it is the Narrowest House in New York City. The space actually used to be just the carriage entrance for the house next door, but somebody saw it, and this being Manhattan, instead of thinking driveway, they thought house. It is just 9.5 feet wide. I've been told the rooms inside are just 8 feet wide. So we're gonna head out to the corner here. We're gonna take a right down Commerce Street. There wasn't really much of a practical routing reason that we absolutely had to walk down Commerce Street, but it's a pretty street and I really like it. So I also wanted to take you down this street so I could take a quick spin around and you could see some of the homes on this block, because you'll see some good examples of what we call the federal style homes. Spinning around now. You tend to, I think, see more and maybe hear more about the Greek Revival style, and that did become very, very popular, and we see a lot of those built in this neighborhood in the mid 1800s. But in the early 1800s, it was the federal style that you saw more of. It was very, very popular for a period of time. So we're coming up here to the corner. That's 7th Avenue up ahead. I do actually have one particular house on this side that I do want to show you. And this was the home of Washington Irving. You can see a plaque as I zoom in a little bit, saying the Irving House. And I'll talk about him a little bit for those of you who are not familiar with him. So we'll step back so you can actually see the house itself and not just the plaque. Then we'll start walking, and I'll tell you a little bit about Washington Irving. He was a writer. He was actually really well known in his day. You may or may not have read some of his works. He wrote Rip Van Winkle. He also wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So if you've ever heard of the Headless Horseman, that's him. And even if you haven't read anything he's ever written, what you probably have heard are some of the words that he used. Knickerbocker. You don't hear it as much anymore because we don't wear knickerbockers. But if you've heard of the basketball team, the New York Knicks, they are actually called the New York Knickerbockers, and that was taken from Irving's works. One I am sure you have heard is Gotham, made world famous because of its use in Batman, but Washington Irving is actually the person who came up with the term Gotham for this place. A little look up and down 7th Avenue as we're crossing. We're going to be crossing over here and actually crossing the other side of the street, but we're going to start walking down Bleeker Street for a little while. So across the street is Bleeker Street Pizza, my favorite place to grab a slice. Definitely go and check it out while you are here. Get the Nonna Maria pizza. It is their specialty and it is amazing. Actually, Greenwich Village in general is a great place for eating pizza. We have some amazing spots here. Joe's Pizzeria, we have Artichoke Pizza. Definitely save a little time for pizza eating if you are a fan, and everybody likes pizza. So another place in this neighborhood that you can see coming up on the right is John's Pizzeria. John's Pizzeria is very famous. It's been in this spot since 1929, and it is another place to go and get fantastic pizza in Greenwich Village. Just as a word of warning, though, you cannot get a slice at John's Pizza. It is whole pies only, so definitely make sure you come hungry. Something you're going to see on this part of Bleeker is some remnants of when this was a big Italian immigrant area. People tend to think Italian immigrants and they really only think Mulberry Street in Manhattan, but between 1880 and 1920, over 4 million Italian immigrants entered through the port of New York City. So this was one of the areas that had a lot of Italian immigrants. So here's a look at Faico's from right across the street. Faico's has been in this neighborhood since the year 1900, not in this specific location. They've been in this location since the 1940s. This is a great place to go and get some Italian specialties, including their arancini or their rice balls. They are absolutely delicious, so highly recommend stopping in here as well. So as we come out from underneath this scaffolding, you're going to start to see Our Lady of Pompeii up ahead and to the right. This is a Catholic church that was established in this neighborhood in the 1890s. Don't worry, we're going to go and see it from the front side as well. I just wanted to point it out to you. Coming up here on the left, we're going to be passing Rocco's, which is a pastry shop, and they make, I'm going to say it, best cannoli in New York City. They fresh fill them to order and they are absolutely fantastic. I know I'm starting to talk about a lot of food things. It's partially because I'm getting hungry and also because Greenwich Village is one of my favorite places to eat in this entire city. Our Lady of Pompeii was established in the 1890s due to the growing number of Italian immigrants in the area. There was a need for an Italian language Catholic church. So straight up ahead on the corner, we're going to be walking and you'll see these cluster of trees. That's Father Demos Square. It's actually named for a pastor of Our Lady of Pompeii. And this place is really beautiful in the fall when the leaves change colors, if you happen to be here at that time. We'll turn around so you can see the front of Our Lady of Pompeii. It is a beautiful building. You may be able to see that it says 1926, and I referenced the congregation being established in the 1890s. 90s. This was not the original location of the congregation. They had to move in the 1920s. And it was actually because of 6th Avenue that you can see up ahead. 6th Avenue, very much like 7th Avenue, where we already were, didn't originally extend all the way up here. And so when they extended 6th Avenue, much like 7th, there were a lot of buildings that were in the way. A lot of buildings that needed to be altered or relocated altogether, which was the case for Our Lady of Pompeii. Up ahead on the left, you're going to see another little patch of green. Even though we do have several larger parks like Washington Square Park in this area, we also have a lot of very small little green spaces. This one is Minetta Square, just a little tiny triangle, but a great place to sit and relax. Going right around the corner so that we can start walking down Minetta Street. You may be noticing a theme. We just saw Minetta Square. Now we're going down Minetta Street. We're going to see Minetta Lane soon. The reason for all the Minettas is it's actually in reference to a body of water that used to be here called the Minetta Brook. So Minetta Street, you'll notice as we walk, has kind of an unusual curving pattern. Minetta Street is actually following the natural curve of the former Minetta Brook. People are sometimes so surprised when they hear about what Manhattan looked like naturally. It was nothing like this. Manhattan was actually very hilly. There were all these rocky outcroppings and a lot of water. Brooks like the Minetta Brook, little creeks and streams and ponds all up and down the island. So they really had quite a bit to contend with as they started to expand the city all the way up Manhattan. But it's a beautiful street, so I will make sure to take a quick turn around so you can see the entire thing. It is very, very pretty, very quiet, and it's very popular because of its look for filming. So we're walking down Minetta Lane now, not Minetta Street. And so coming up here right on the left, you're going to see Cafe Wha. That's what we're going to see up here on the corner at MacDougal Street. Cafe Wha is a music venue. It was founded in the late 1950s by Manny Roth. Manny Roth is the uncle of David Lee Roth of Van Halen, if you've heard of him. Lots of music history in this building. Bob Dylan played his first gig in New York City here. Jimi Hendrix played here early in his career. That's why you can see him on the door there. So right across the street is the Minetta Tavern. Minetta Tavern was a very popular literary hangout in the 1930s. Step out into the street here for just a minute to look down MacDougal, a great place to find lots of different types of food. So I'm going to start walking up MacDougal now. So first place we're going to pass right up here on the left is the Comedy Cellar. Comedy Cellar is a very famous stand-up comedy venue, and it is a great place to check out a show if you're interested. Also right up here is Mamoun's Falafel. Mamoun's was the first falafel place in New York City. Also on MacDougal, Cafe Reggio, home of the first cappuccino in New York City. So right across the street, this red brick home was once the home of Louisa May Alcott, the author of Little Women. This was not her house, this was her uncle's house, but she did live here for about 2 years. And they say that it was while she was here she started the very beginnings of what became Little Women, her best known work. So we're going to be walking north up MacDougal. We're making our way up to Washington Square Park. We're going to pass by Groove here on the left. This is another great place to go and listen to live music. Greenwich Village in general is a really great place to check out some live music while you're here in New York City. You're also going to start to see the beginnings of NYU. NYU is not a traditional U.S. university in that they don't have a campus, but they do have a lot of buildings concentrated in this neighborhood, and you'll be able to pick them out because they have their purple and white flags hanging down. So NYU was considered really unusual when it was established in 1831. It was for a couple of reasons. First of all, they stated that admission was based on merit, not birthright or class. University education was largely reserved for the children of the very wealthy at that time. time. But it was also unusual because it was a private university, but it was not actually affiliated with any particular religious denomination. And that was something that was very, very strange for the time. So we're going to be crossing over here and heading into Washington Square Park. So we're going to go ahead and head in. We're going to see a lot of Washington Square Park, so this is really just the beginning. But this first little open area that we're going to come up to, you're going to see a lot of chess tables. And it's pretty early in the day still, so you don't see a lot of people out playing chess, but I can assure you that will change a little bit later on in the day. You can already see a few people that are out. There's a few parks in New York City that have this similar kind of chess setup, but Washington Square Park has a very active chess scene. If you are a chess player, you'll have guys that sit here all day long asking passerbys to play them. So by all means, sit down, play a game. I will warn you, they're very, very good. So you can see as we start to get a little bit further in, though, this is a really beautiful park. Lots of nicely manicured green spaces and lots of benches for people in this neighborhood to just sit down, relax, and watch the world go by. As we get a little bit closer into the center of the park, you're going to start to see one of the main features, which is the Washington Square Park fountain up ahead. There has been a fountain in Washington Square Park since the 1850s. It was later replaced in the 1870s and then went through a couple different renovations. But there has been a fountain in the park since the 1850s, though not always in this spot. A few years back, there was a push for the fountain to be moved 23 feet. The reason for it is people thought it would be nice if the fountain perfectly lined up and was nice and symmetrical with the other main feature of the park, which is the Washington Arch, and you can see that off on your left. So millions of taxpayer dollars later, the fountain has been moved the 23 feet so that it lines up nicely. You know, whether or not you think that is a colossal waste of money or not, I will admit it does make for a very striking image and a very nice photograph. So we're getting a little bit closer here to the Washington Arch, and we'll talk a little bit more about the arch and its history. Work on the Washington Arch began in 1892. The arch was meant to be a commemoration of the 100-year anniversary of George Washington's inauguration, which took place here in New York City. It was designed by Stanford White, and you can probably tell it was modeled on the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. This is our spin on it. It is considered one of the most recognizable things in Greenwich Village. And look, we're going to turn around, look at how nicely lined up it is with that fountain. It is early in the day, so it's pretty quiet right now, but if you were to come later on, Washington Square Park is typically very, very lively. You'll see lots of people, lots of activity, and actually lots of street performers. A guy with a piano that plays a couple hours most days. You'll see jazz musicians on weekends. You'll see acrobatics and break dancers. It's really a great place to see some pretty amazing street performers. Washington Square Park didn't always look like this, and actually it's gone through a couple of different uses. It was turned into a military parade ground in 1826 and then into a park in 1850. But before all of that, this was a potter's field, or a free public burial ground, specifically for people who had been killed in a yellow fever epidemic down there in New York City. There are to this day thousands of people buried underneath Washington Square Park. This is considered one of the most haunted areas of New York City. If you are into ghosts or the supernatural, please consider checking out our Greenwich Village ghost tour to hear about all of the different spooky stories that have occurred, not just in Washington Square Park, but all throughout the neighborhood. Today, this area is really just used by neighborhood residents and visitors alike who are looking for a quiet, green place to be for a little while. If you find yourself with some free time on your trip in New York City, I highly recommend grab some of the great food in this neighborhood, find a bench, and do a little bit of people watching. This is where I am actually going to leave you, in beautiful Washington Square Park.
Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed our virtual tour. Check out Free Tours by Foot next time you're in New York City. We have group pay what you wish walking tours. We also have self-guided tours and audio tours available. So we hope to see you in person really soon. Till next time, bye.